The following podcast is offered freely through the Insight Meditation Community of Washington and by Jonathan Foust. To learn more or to make a donation to support this work, please go to www.jonathanfoust.com.
There's a story that's told about Mahatma Gandhi. He was approached by a young woman who said, "My son eats too much candy. Could I bring him in so you could tell him to stop eating sugar?" And Gandhi thought about it for a moment and said, "Bring him back in 2 weeks." Or he might actually have said, "Bring him back in 2 weeks." So she brought him back in 2 weeks, and he sat down with the young boy and he said, "Don't eat so much candy. Sugar's not good for you." Or in the appropriate accent. So the boy listened, and they're about to leave, and the mother said, "Thank you very much, but why did you wait for 2 weeks?" And Gandhi said, "Well, until that point, I was still eating candy." I'd like to talk tonight about practice. What it means to practice awareness, because that's such a great example of making sure you're in integrity, in his practice. Before I give every Dharma talk, I have 3 questions that I'd like to ponder that really helps me to kind of connect with the topic. The first one is, why is this important? And I really feel that taking time to really think about your practice, and we'll talk about a definition of that, it's very, very important, because it's what you do that brings you home. It's what you do that helps you to remind yourself what's most important. The second question I ask myself on my little outline here is, what am I most excited about you getting out of this? And that is that having a practice or discipline can be incredibly transforming. And I'm sure there are times when there's something you've really wanted and you've made it a priority, and that one change has affected your life in a powerful way. And I know from those who have been able to sustain a practice, the results can be quite transformational. That's exciting to me. The third question I ask myself before these talks is, if this was my last talk, what would I want you to remember, and how would I like you to feel? There's a really interesting little thing that kind of comes through the Buddhist lens. And it's about taking responsibility for your own enlightenment. As the saying goes, like, no one is going to save you. It's about taking responsibility for your life. You're the inheritor of your karma, and you are the creator of your karma. So having a practice that's dialed in is huge, really important. So it's about finding a practice that resonates for you and how to keep it going. So 4 things I'd like to touch on. One is the importance of really honestly assessing where you are in your life. The second is is a part of that, which is identifying your growing edge. Where's the growing edge in your life? And then consciously cultivating some form of observance, some form of practice you might engage into, but also with that some form of restraint. Is there something you might restrain from that might give you energy, give you greater insight? And fourth, just one really important factor in spiritual practice that can really make a difference for you, I hope. As always, these talks are given with satisfaction guaranteed, or double your misery back. So first has to do with self-assessment. Deepak Chopra once said that when he would sit with a client as a doctor, someone who had some healing crisis, he could ask them two questions, and the way they would respond to these two questions would determine their healing potential. The first question, are you happy? The second question, do you enjoy what you do? And he found that if it was a yes to both, that person had a fair bit of energy mobilized for their healing. And if it was a yes to one, no to the other, some work to do, and no to both, a fair bit of work to do. So that's an interesting question. And if you like, you can close your eyes. We'll do a little 30-second Zen pop quiz. When you reflect on your life, are you happy? How would you assess your happiness level on a scale of 1 to 10? And do you enjoy what you do? How would you honestly assess enjoying what you do? And then if you like, you can let your eyes open. Simply asking those questions can be quite profound. Because when you ask a question like that, am I happy? What you're doing, you're activating something that Ajahn Chah, who's one of the great meditation masters, roughly translated as you're activating the one who knows. You're activating some form of self-awareness without judgment. And that's one of the very powerful byproducts in meditation practice. That you cultivate this capacity for self-observation, to see more clearly what you couldn't see before. When you really reflect on those questions, anything that's between you and feeling happy or enjoying what you do inevitably will be infiltrated in some way by what are called the three poisons, in some form of greed or wanting or craving, some form of hatred or aversion or judgment or blame, or some form of delusion, believing something's true that's not really true, or believing something isn't true that is true. What practice does is it begins to heighten your awareness of those three qualities, where you begin to see more clearly into the nature of craving, wanting, greedy mind. You begin to see more clearly into those parts that are all about aversion, judgment, anger, blame, and ill will. And you begin to see more clearly into the distinction between your version of reality and what's actually real. Of course, this function, this self-regulating function, it's operational all the time. You realize when you're too wound up, you want to relax. You realize at some point you're too scattered, you need to focus. So we're really learning how to kind of refine that self-assessment quality. And it's really what we think of as the power of the pause. Is when you pause, that whole mechanism of self-awareness begins to kick in. The two questions of mindfulness. What is my experience right now? Not my desire, not my embellishment, not my story, but what's actually happening right now? And can I be with it? Can I allow this? And this was really, when we go back to the lens of Buddhist psychology, this is really kind of kicked off the Buddha's whole quest, was realizing that he was deeply unsettled, that he wasn't happy. And when he saw the heavenly messengers, when he saw sickness and old age and death, it deeply unsettled him. And that began his quest to find what is real happiness. Is there anything that goes beyond sickness, old age, and death? So that honest self-assessment is so critical. Am I happy? Do I enjoy what I do? So this leads to the question of, what is your growing edge? What is it that wants attention? So a classic story, one that I really like, and I believe I may have shared, is the story of a wise sage who lived deep in the wilderness. And in order to see this sage, you had to walk for 2 solid days through the wilderness to get to where this great sage lived. Everyone who came back from seeing the sage reported that it was the most powerful experience they'd ever had, but they wouldn't talk about it. So, as the story goes, someone made that trek to see the sage, walked for 2 days through the wilderness. And the sage invited him in and said, I'm going to ask you a question, but you have to promise me that you won't tell anyone what this question is. So the person said, yes. And the sage, one simple question. What are you not willing to feel? You can imagine, as you take the 2 days through the wilderness to walk back, that plants a very, very deep seed. So perhaps we can try that one on as well. If you like, you can close your eyes. And when you sense all that is occurring in your life, and sometimes I like to think of my life as the roles that I play. Son, daughter, father, mother, sibling, earner, creative, spiritual practitioner, homeowner. As you think of all the different roles that you play in your life, what are you not willing to feel? Just take a minute to reflect on this. And if you like, you can deepen the breath. And I'd like to offer another inquiry, which can be yet another way to sort of identify what's present in your life, where that edge might be. It's a form of inquiry meditation, and it's something that comes out of the work of Dr. Eugene Gendlin with the work in focusing, and something that we practice a lot in the Year of Living Mindfully. It's called clearing the space. And it's one question. And when you hear the question, you just let one thing come to mind. And you, as if you're saying it aloud to yourself, you say hello to it. And you just gently place it to the side. There are a couple of variations of the question. One is, what's between you and feeling really good inside? Another is, what's between you and feeling happy? Another is, what's between you and feeling free? Oftentimes when I do this practice for myself, it might be something trivial. You know, what's between me and feeling free? I didn't get enough caffeine today. I'm feeling a little logy. Well, you say hello to that. And just imagine, not like you make it go away, but you place the concern for it to the side. Then you ask again, what's between you and feeling free? It might be something more subtle, like, you know, wherever I look, there's just this subtle anxiety that's always present. You say hello to that. You place the concern for that to the side. There are a couple things that sort of arise when you do the practice. Sometimes when I offer this with people and we go through it, eventually they might say, you know, other than these 15 things, I'm starting to feel pretty free inside. Sometimes it's sort of a landscape. I mean, you just identify the landscape of what's there. So if you like, we'll give this a try. As I offer the question, just let one thing come to mind. You might imagine you're sort of saying it aloud. Just say hello to it, let it know you see it. Then just gently place it to the side. And then we'll do this for a number of rounds. So with your eyes closed, as you reflect on your life as it is, what's between you and feeling free? And then again, what's between you and feeling free or happy? And what's between you and feeling free or happy? And what's between you and feeling free or happy? And what's between you and feeling happy or free? And you might pause here and in your own way, just say hello to what you've named, this landscape of what you named that's between you and feeling free or happy. And you might let these issues know that at some point when the conditions are supportive, you might investigate them a little more intimately. And then if you like, you can let your eyes open. So I hope you found that helpful. There are times, you know how it is, you wake up in the morning and you have those moments of feeling fine, and then the software programs start booting up, and then suddenly you've got 10 things you're anxious about. And I find sometimes when I watch that process, I can feel sort of the tightening, sort of the clench around self-identity. I can just stop and just say, okay, so what's between me and feeling free? Oh yeah, there's this thing I gotta write, and I gotta get that out before lunch. Oh, okay. What's between me and feeling free? Oh, there's this thing over here. But there's something about naming it that can be so powerful, because it identifies what's there, but it also reinforces who you are as the observer of that. This really has to do with the first two noble truths, that suffering happens, and that there's a cause of that suffering, which has to do with some form of attachment or clinging, or the inability to let go. And when we have these things that are between us and feeling free or feeling happy, if we don't address them, they become more chronic, of course. So when we pause and we can really name what's there, we can then mobilize our attention to actually be in relationship with that which is between us and feeling free or feeling happy. So when you've done an honest assessment of where you are in your life, and you have a sense of where your edge is, then it becomes a question of how to be with it, just how to work with it. I was talking with someone, it's Thursday or Friday, and I just said, so what are you doing for the weekend? And she said, oh, I'm going out. I said, oh, that's nice. She said, well, I make myself go out because it's too easy for me just to stay home, and I get too introverted, and I just get really sad. I thought, how wonderful! There's practice. It's realizing here's this knowledge that when I don't go out and interact with people, I get too introverted, and it leads to a sense of sadness. So then the discipline is, I'm putting myself out there. I don't necessarily like it, but I know it's good for me. That's that edge. That's the really the fire of spiritual practice. I've named before in yoga there's a term called tapas, which is not food on little plates. It's the word literally, it means a number of things. It means discipline and it means fire. So you engage into a discipline that has some element of discomfort. You do something that you know is good for you, and yet it's difficult and challenging. So part of the self-assessment is, again, sort of like the ruthless self-evaluation. And I oftentimes find it helpful. As we kind of come toward the end of the year, I'm kind of doing my own assessment of the year. It's kind of an annual ritual for me. And I think I named this before, but to really name your drains and your gains. What are the things that drain your energy? What are the things in your life that you're putting up with that just leach the energy right out of you? And can you clearly identify the gains? What are the practices? What are the activities that give you energy? That can be very, very helpful. I mentioned before, but again, since I'm at the end of the year and doing my own review, of reviewing my toleration list. If you're not familiar with this, it's a great activity where you write down everything you're tolerating, everything you're putting up with. And I recommend you get a clipboard and just walk around your house from room to room. It's unbelievable. I started in on it today because I know I had this talk. And just the room I was sitting in, that office has just got too much clutter. You know, I've got this old technology just sitting there that I've got to get rid of. You know, there's that drawer I haven't opened in 3 years. You know, here are these books that I'm never going to read that are just sitting there. That's just one room. Then you go to your vehicles. And when I've done this before, the first time I did it, I had 85 things on my list. And then I had a weekend, and I just thought, let's see how many of these I could knock out. And I knocked out maybe like 15 or 20. I can't tell you how much energy that gave me. One was the way the door would squeak. It just bugged the heck out of me. It didn't take that long to fix it. And then every time I'd open the door, there'd just be this like, oh my God, this feels so good. So consider in your ruthless self-evaluation, what are you tolerating? What are you putting up with? And believe me, when you knock some of those things out, it is such a good feeling. I always find when I do my evaluation of my clothes and just give them away, and there's space where it didn't exist before, it's a rush. At least it is for me. I don't know what that says about me. Then the other thing that is very, very helpful is make a list of what gives you energy. What are the gains? What are the things that are pretty much guaranteed that if you do them, you're going to have more energy than you did before you started? And so for me, it's being on the river, it's swimming, it's hiking, it's just doing a lying down meditation, you know, for 15 minutes. It's fantastic. Doing some yoga. Whenever I eat on a schedule, it always gives me more energy. The creative projects, knocking off small projects, just getting them done. Big boost in energy. Cleaning up a mess actually gives me energy. And in the past, I've made a list of those things and just put it right next to my computer. And it's such a great reminder when I'm feeling a little bit low. These are guaranteed gains in energy. So that might be a helpful thing. And then once you really identify the drains, what gets in the way, and the gains, what gives you energy, part of spiritual practice is about locking in the things that you know are going to support you. You know, think of them as the must-haves. I had this one experience back in the ashram. There was one of the brothers there. He was married, and I hope he doesn't listen to this. I don't think they will. And I knew his wife. I worked with her. And she was, I really loved her, but she was a kind of a challenging person. But I'd always see him out on his bike or hanging out with people. And at one point I thought, what's going on here? So I actually asked him, I said, look, I know who you're married to, and I know she's lovely, but she can be really challenging. But I just see you like out having fun a lot. How do you do it? And he said, well, we just sat down, and I said, I'll have dinner with you every night. I'll go to your parents on the weekends. I'll talk any issue through with you. I'll go shopping with you. I need 90 minutes a day. That's mine, non-negotiable. And she said, okay. I thought, wow, that was so cool. But then the question is, what could you lock in that would give you energy? The non-negotiables. That's an important part of practice. And spiritual practice doesn't just have to be sitting with your eyes closed. It can really be an assessment of what feeds you. How would you build that in? Tony Robbins has this great thing. He's so good at his little marketing stuff. But he said, every day you need your hour of power. And I love the language of that. Like if you had 1 hour that was all about gaining power, like gaining energy, how would you design that? And the way you design it will be different than how someone else might design it. But I love that query. If you were to build in an hour, and the goal of that hour was for you to feel more present, more alive, and more vital, how would you design that? There's no one prescription. You'd have to do, and really what it comes down to is doing experimentation. You experiment and you evaluate. Is the result of this practice creating a more wholesome state or a less wholesome state? And that's part of taking responsibility for our own spiritual practice. So there's this desire to be more awake. And there's the story of St. Augustus, who lived a very worldly life, really, really loved his carnal life, and was also drawn to sort of spiritual purification. So he had this one prayer where he said, Lord, make me sexually pure, but not yet. There's so many teachings and teachers and disciplines that are more than happy to tell you what the best practice is and what you should practice. And I really feel, just in my years of practice and teaching, that there is no one pure technique. I think traditionally there's always been, the teaching of, if you want water, you dig one well. Don't dig 10, dig one, go deep. There's something to that. But it's also so important to experiment with different techniques and different traditions to find out what resonates for you. There's so many doorways. When you look through the portals of yoga, there's bhakti yoga, which is the yoga of devotion. Some of us are naturally more devotional. And devotional practices, and I always love each one of these disciplines, they always say, this is the direct path. But if you're a very devotional person, that's a very direct experience. Whatever it is you're devoted to, a teacher, a tradition, when you turn yourself over with devotion, it's a direct connection. Some of us are more intellectual. So we find that studying, through reading, through contemplating the teachings, direct path. You're blowing the mind through the mind. Very, very powerful. Some of us are more action-oriented, and we find ourselves through karma yoga, the yoga of service. We just lose ourselves in serving others. It's a very powerful, a very direct path. Some of us find that mantra, for example, the sound. You can lose yourself into sound. Very, very powerful. Others through purifying the body. Each of us has a different temperament. So to find the practices that really resonate for you, very, very, very important. Walt Whitman said, this is what he said you should do. The first line is, this is what you should do. Love the earth and sun and animals. Despise riches. Give alms to everyone that asks. Stand up for the stupid and crazy. Devote your income and labor to others. Hate tyrants. Argue not concerning God. Have patience and indulgence toward the people. Re-examine all you have been told in school or church or in any book. Dismiss what insults your very soul, and your flesh shall become a great poem. That's his mission statement. That's him identifying, here is where I come alive. And each one of us has to do that for ourselves. So there's one particular phrase that I have found so helpful in spiritual practice. 2 words. Keep going. I think there are different phases we go through in our practice. There's an element of practice, oftentimes when we first begin, where we feel sort of like that rush of letting go. We feel what Deepak Chopra calls the field of infinite possibility. And I describe that phase for myself as chasing lights and rainbows, which is what I did for a couple decades, of just sort of gunning for these transcendent experiences. And eventually there's a time where you realize, what goes up must come down. Is there something beyond just the highs and lows? And that shifted my practice quite a bit into more of just an intention to wake up, just to be awake to what is here. And so wherever you are in your practice, when you're feeling really down and struggling, and one of the things I love about being committed to transformation is there's a recognition that when you're really struggling, you're right at the point of insight and opportunity. Kind of in this collection of people, it's one of the few areas where you can hang out and someone will say, how are you doing? And you can say, there's just sort of like this deep sadness and just a whole lot of fear and anxiety. And the other person will say, wow, that's great. Tell me more. Because there's a recognition that we are, in order to become more awake and more alive, we have to identify what's between us and feeling free. And when you can name that, and when you have the presence of mind, the concentration, the non-judging awareness, the energy, to really examine that, to see what's true in there. Where is the holding? Where can I let go? When you can do that, more and more aliveness is available. Your capacity for happiness, for joy, seems to increase. But when you feel yourself really stuck, keep going. And when you think you've arrived, that's where you really need to keep going. That's what I found for myself. So the questions become, what do you really, really want? And what are you willing to give up to get it? There is truly an element of practice. And again, I make the distinction between my maintenance practice and the practice around transformation. The maintenance practice is what keeps my nostrils above the waterline. But when I do more intensive practice, like committing to sustained practice over a period of time, or doing some retreats to deepen my practice, that's when it really seems to up the ante a little bit. There's a real commitment to being comfortable with discomfort. That's so important if you're really serious about practice. Either you'll identify what's between you and feeling free consciously, or it will find you. It's kind of what happens. So the question becomes, when you find yourself caught in resistance showing up primarily as 5 mental states, when you find yourself caught in aversion, anger, judgment, blame, or you find yourself caught in wanting, craving, grasping, fantasy, or if you find yourself caught in some knot of cycling anxiety and worry, or if you find yourself caught in some cycle of downward spiraling energy or depression, or you find yourself caught in doubt or extreme self-criticism, it's so important to recognize that's the practice. That's where the practice kicks in. Because those 5 states are a sign of resistance. You're fighting something. You're resisting something. And is it possible to recognize what's there, to open to it, and to lean into it, to investigate it with some kindness, to bring some empathy and compassion, to sense what's going on here? What am I believing? And is that true? What's the story I'm believing here? How does this tight judging place inside want me to be with it right now? And that leads to the second 2 of these 4 noble truths. That when you are caught or find yourself unable to let go, the third noble truth is you can let go. And when you do let go, there is a shift in identity. New possibilities begin to arise. And the fourth noble truth is that there are practices, there are observances that lead to an increased capacity for happiness and joy. So to keep going is such an important part of the practice. And then the question becomes, how do you keep going? Because this is not a practice for the faint of heart. As my friend Pat Coffey says, that in his long life of practice, he knows of maybe 4 or 5 people who are able to sustain a practice alone. And that's where Sangha or community is so important. Whether it be one person or whether it be tapping in with a collective. That's why there have been monasteries and ashrams and refuges where people can gather together. If nothing else, as Jack Kornfield says, meditating in a large group is really beneficial, because if you're having particularly insane thoughts, you blame them on the person behind you. It works. So at the end of every year, for the last couple of years, I've been doing my annual report, which I actually publish. Just in transparency, it's helpful. It ups the ante for me. And what I really ask myself is, what's gone well? What hasn't gone well? And what am I committed to in the year ahead? I just wanted to plant that seed if you'd like to move into that evaluation. It's been really helpful for me. And I'll put that online. Sometimes it's easy to get caught in pessimism. But I love this line about, this is a definition of an optimist. This is someone who figures out that taking a step backward and taking a step forward is not a disaster. It's the cha-cha. So, determining your practice, that's a really dumb one, but I couldn't resist. So determining the best practice, you really need to ask yourself, what's your happiness level right now? What are you not willing to feel? And what observances and what restraints, what practices, what might you not do that might help you bring closer and closer contact with that? What support would you need to do that? Why don't I'll share a little reading and then we'll have just a couple minutes to sit. So if you like, you can close your eyes. This is a poem called After a While You Learn. After a while, you learn the subtle difference between holding a hand and chaining a soul. And you learn that love doesn't mean leaving, and company doesn't mean security. And you begin to learn that kisses aren't compromises, and presents aren't promises. And you begin to accept your defeats with your head up and your eyes ahead, with the grace of a woman or man, not the grief of a child. And you learn to build all your loads on today, because tomorrow's ground is too uncertain for plans, and futures have a way of falling down in mid-flight. After a while, you learn that even sunshine burns if you ask too much. So you plant your own garden and decorate your own soul instead of waiting for someone to buy you flowers. And you learn that you really can endure, that you really are strong, and you really do have worth. And you learn, and you learn. With every failure, you learn. And gently deepening your breath. And when you're ready, you can let your eyes open. Well, thank you for letting me rant about practice. Just a few quick reminders. One is, you probably know, but I want to kind of re-invite you to consider coming to yoga before our session here. And Rita, you're here. If you want to just stand up so you can find Rita. Rita's kind of pulled all this together. If you have any questions about the class, please feel free to check in with her. It can be a wonderful way to kind of prepare yourself for practice. So it's offered freely, and thank you for making this available. If you'd like to be on the mailing list and you're not, or if you signed up and maybe I didn't enter your name correctly, you can sign up in the back. Thank you as always for your support. And the spiritual practice is long and arduous, so you'll probably need a cookie.